So the lens I chose for this project is the critical lens. Um, so in the story Huckleberry Finn, Jim is kind of trying to deal with figuring out who he is versus what society kind of tells him he is because of the color of his skin and not kind of who he is as a person. So we all struggle with the conflict of who we are and what society tells us to be. This point is the beginning of the story when Jim escapes from his owner, Mrs. Watson, and finds Huck on the island. Huck is very shocked when he finds out Jim has run away from Mrs. Watson because colored people aren't at liberty to make their own decisions in this time period. He was essentially property to Mrs. Watson. So Jim tells Huck that Mrs. Watson was offered $800 to sell him to a family that lives in New Orleans, which would rip him away from his family, which obviously doesn't matter to Mrs. Watson because Jim is her property and not a person. So, sorry. Jim knows that he isn't just a slave and he knows that he's a person. He doesn't want to be separated from his family, obviously, because once he's separated from his family, there's no chance of him being able to escape. So he runs before Mrs. Watson can sell him. So Huck is again surprised that Jim ran away because society views colored people as slaves no matter what or how far or where he goes. Jim will always belong to someone. And in the beginning, when Huck first saw Jim, he clearly saw him as just a slave because Huckleberry Finn was taught by society that's all slaves were, is just property. They're not their own person, which is not very good. The next point is when Huck is fighting with his internal thoughts on whether turning Jim in or helping him escape is the right thing to do because society says Jim is a slave, but Huck is kind of starting to see him in another way as more of a friend. And as Huck and Jim are on their journey, Jim unintentionally makes Huck kind of begin to realize that Jim isn't just property as society says he is. And this helps Jim with his own internal conflict as well because it kind of helps him to realize that, oh, people will be able to see me as a human being and that there's hope for the future for him to escape and be his own person and be with his family. So as Huck and Jim kind of spend more time together, Huckleberry Finn kind of realizes that he and Jim have so much more in common than he originally had thought. And he kind of realizes that they're both people just kind of escaping from a society that tells them what to do and how to be. So when Huck leaves to get directions to Kara to help them both start their new lives, Jim is really excited for his new anticipated life. So Huck is kind of beginning to question if he's made a mistake helping Jim escape and get this far because he's still struggling with the fact that he's still property from the one person who had tried to help him when he was young, Mrs. Watson. And so as Huck is dealing with this conflict of what he thinks is right and wrong, Jim ends up telling Huckleberry Finn that he's the only friend he's ever had and he's the only friend he has right now. And this kind of statement of friendship really helps Huckleberry Finn to realize that his intentions of turning Jim in aren't right and that he should keep maintaining the friendship with him and keep helping him. So we see both of these characters kind of dealing with the conflict of who they think they are versus kind of who society tells them to be and how they should behave. So this connects the characters on a personal and emotional level as they both kind of see themselves as people wanting the same things in life, which is the freedom to be themselves. But however, Huck's conflicts directly affects both of Jim's conflicts, which are freedom from slavery and the ability to see himself as something other than property. The final point is when Huck realizes and desires that Jim's prospects of what he wants in life could be possible and could be fulfilled. So Huck has finally resolved his internal conflict because he wants for Jim what Jim wants for himself as well. So Huck says, though don't seem natural, he realizes that Jim loves his family just as much as white men love theirs. So Jim's desires for families, for having a good family, is normal and safe and free. So it relates to Huck's longing for his own freedom in his future as well. So there we go. Huck is finally realizing that Jim is the same as any other white guy, and that society only sees slaves as property because of their skin color. And Huck, being with Jim, came to realize that it was no different from being with any other person. And Jim has feelings, desires, wants, and needs in the same as Huck, who is white, the same as anyone else in society. So we all struggle with the conflict of who we are and what society tells us to be. And so this theme connects with the ethnic lens because society tells colored people that they are just slaves and that they're property. However, Jim and Huck know slaves are humans and have families, feelings, and dreams just the same as anyone else. So Jim deals with his conflicts on two levels. So Jim has the internal struggles with who he believes he is versus what society tells him to be. And then Jim's other conflict is external. His freedom is dependent on Huck's moral decision.